One of the more well-known and widely observed practices of the so-called 9 days, beginning with Rosh Chodesh Av, at least among Ashkenazim, among certain Sfardim, it's not for the entire 9 days, but rather for the days during the week, which we call Shavua Shechalbo, Tisha B'Av, the week in which Tisha B'Av lands, is to abstain from Basar v'Yayin, to refrain from eating meat and drinking wine during these 9 days, or during that week of Shavua Shechalbo, the week when Tisha B'Av lands up. And the question is, what is the source for that particular practice of not eating meat and drinking wine during these days? The practice is mentioned in the Shulchan Aruch. It's recorded in Hilchos Tisha B'Av and Orach Chaim Sim Tov Kuf Nun Aleph Sif Tes, where the Mechaber quotes actually both practices. Some people have the custom to refrain from meat and wine just during the week when Tisha B'Av falls. Others extend it to the entire 9 days, beginning Rosh Chodesh Av. He actually records a third practice there that is not generally observed, and that is that there are some people who don't even eat meat and drink wine even for the entire 3 weeks, beginning on Shavuos B'Tammuz. But again, the practice is recorded in the Shulchan Aruch, but what exactly is a mokor? What's the source? Because the practice is not recorded. This custom, the Shulchan Aruch calls it a custom. It's not mentioned anywhere in the Mishnayos. It's not mentioned anywhere in the Gemara, at least not in the Talmud Bavli. We'll get back to the Talmud Yerushalmi shortly. But it's not mentioned in Medrash Halacha. So where exactly does this practice come from? We do have a statement in a Mishnah in Maseches Taanis, Tav Chav Vav Mebeis, where the Mishnah indicates that at the Suda HaMafsekes, the last meal that's eaten on Erev Tisha B'Av, in the afternoon, right before the fast starts, we have a meal late in the day. So that meal, the Mishnah already mentions one should not have meat and wine at that meal. And we understand that we're about to begin the very intense period of mourning that Tisha B'Av represents, a day of sadness and tragedy and so on. And therefore, when we go into the fast, so on Erev Tisha B'Av, right before the fast begins, we don't want to have a Suda of having meat and wine. But the question again is, how did this come to extend? How did this come to be observed as well for the whole 9 days or for the whole Shavua Shechalbo? Again, given that it's not mentioned in that Mishnah, which talks only about the Suda Mafsekes right before Tisha B'Av starts. And so we could suggest on a simple level that perhaps it's rooted in the idea that eating meat and drinking wine are activities that are generally associated with simcha. They're generally associated with gladness, with joy. We know that on Yontif, there is a mitzvah to eat meat and drink wine, perhaps in a Chol HaMoed, because there's a mitzvah of Simchas Yontif, and one of the ways in which we express this simcha on Yontif, and as I said, maybe even on Chol HaMoed, is that we make sure to eat meat and drink wine. Chazal tell us in a couple of places, Ein Simcha El B'Basar, Ein Simcha El B'Yayin. So Simcha is associated with Basar and Yayin, and we do know that very same Mishnah in Taanis on Daf Chav Vav Mebeis mentions the rule that Misha Nichnas Av Mematin B'Simcha. When the month of Av arrives, we minimize, we sort of cut back, we downplay any activities that relate to Simcha. We try and minimize our Simcha. So one could suggest that the idea of not eating meat and drinking wine during the 9 days has to do with the fact that when the month of Av arrives, we're mematin b'simcha, we sort of cut back on activities normally associated with simcha, and since eating meat and drinking wine are associated often with simcha, we can cut back on it. We abstain from that during these 9 days. The problem with understanding that is the primary idea behind this particular custom that we have, and as I said before, is so widespread, is that really there is no din, there is no requirement that an ovel, somebody who's sitting shiva, there's no din that that person is not allowed to eat meat and drink wine. An ovel is permitted to eat meat and drink wine during the week of shiva. Even during the week of shiva, an ovel is allowed to eat meat and drink wine. And so it's hard to say that the 9 days or the Shavua Shechalbo are going to take on dinim that are even stricter. When a person is sitting shiva after the death of one of his relatives, why should this be so strict that it even outweighs that in terms of this prohibition? Again, it's possible to dinim and matin with simcha, but an ovel is also not permitted to engage in activities that relate to simcha, certainly not during the shiva and even beyond the shiva. And yet an ovel is permitted to eat meat and to drink wine. In fact, there's one opinion that the sudas havra, that's the meal that the relatives eat when they return from the cemetery, some suggest that should be a fleshing meal. So the question again is that doesn't seem to be an absolute source based on the fact that an ovel is permitted. An onain is not allowed to eat meat and drink wine. That's true. That's the mission brachas. And an onain means one of the relatives, when 7 immediate relatives are Shiva Krovim, father, mother, sister, brother, son, daughter, spouse. So one of those relatives, God forbid, dies. So the surviving relative, or relatives of that person, are required to become what we call an onain, and that's the starts from the time that the person dies or the time that you hear that the person has died, but that only lasts until the burial. So during the period when you're an onain, called aninos, the din of aninos takes effect. So they're talking about eat meat and drink wine. But again, that requirement expires when the deceased is buried and the family goes back and begins the shiva. During the shiva, you're allowed to eat meat and drink wine. So again, we're back to our question: why can't you eat meat and drink wine during the 9 days or during the Shavua Shechal Bo Tisha B'Av? So it's interesting. I mentioned before that Bavli doesn't mention this, but there is a Yerushalmi in the fourth parak of Psachim, where the Talmud Yerushalmi states, according to one girsa, that it's not proper to drink wine and perhaps by extension eat meat during the 9 days. The thing is that the Vilna Gaon, and that same simon, the Shulchan Aruch, Tav Kuf Nun Aleph, and on Sif Tes, the Vilna Gaon asserts that is an incorrect girsa. That's not the right text, and that's not what the Yerushalmi is talking about. The Yerushalmi is rather talking about, there's an Aramaic word for wool, which is similar to the Aramaic word for wine, a letter difference. And what the Rami was really talking about there was not working with wool, like sewing clothes and fixing clothes and so on, which we don't do. We don't launder during the 9 days. We don't fix things that are torn clothes and so on and so forth during the 9 days. And they're only going to assert that that's the correct gears. And that's what the Yerushalmi there was talking about. It's not talking about eating meat and drinking wine. So what then is the source for avoiding eating meat and drink wine if you don't accept that Yerushalmi as the source? So the Vilna Gaon there, the Bir HaGra, points to a Gemara in Bava Basra and Daf Samach Amud Beis. That's the very last Amud in Parak Cheskas Habatim. And there the Gemara tells a fascinating story. The Gemara says that after the second Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, there were a group of people, a group of Jews who were so distraught, who were so heartbroken, who were so bent out of shape about the fact that Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, was that they decided they're not going to eat meat and drink wine. You know when? Forever. Never again. How can we eat meat? No more karbonos. The meat was associated with karbonos, and now there's no Beis Hamikdash. We don't bring karbonos. How can we go ahead and eat meat? The wine. How can we drink wine ever? The wine reminds us of the nesachim, the wine libations. Wine was poured on the mizbech, accompanying the karbonos, right? So we don't have meat and wine anymore in the Beis Hamikdash. No more Beis Hamikdash. How can we go ahead and eat meat and drink wine? So they wanted to ban it forever. So Rabbi Yeshua, one of the Tanaim was alive at the time, said to them, so 1 second. So what about eating bread? After all, there are many offerings, the mincha offerings, the carbon mincha, with flour and oil and so on, mixtures very similar to bread. Okay, they were flour and baked into, not actually bread, but matzah type items. But again, it's similar to bread. And so Rabbi Yeshua said, how can you eat bread? To remind you of the Beis Hamikdash, the same problem. They said, yeah, you're right. You're right. We shouldn't eat bread either. We're not going to eat bread either. We'll eat fruit. So Rabbi Yeshua said, 1 second. There's a mitzvah of bikurim. You're supposed to bring your first fruits to Yerushalayim, to the Beis Hamikdash. Certain fruits, when they begin to grow, they first blossom and so on. So you have to mark them off and then bring the first fruits of bikurim to the Beis Hamikdash. Can't eat fruits either because it reminds us of the Beis Hamikdash. And finally, Yeshua said to them, "And what about drinking water? Can't drink water either." On Sukkot, you had a whole ceremony where they went down, the so-called Simchas Beis HaShoeva. They would go down and draw water from a water source outside Yerushalayim and bring the water up to the Beis Hamikdash. And they would pour the water on his back. Nisuch hamayim. How can you drink water? What was Yeshua's point? Yeshua's point was that, of course, we have to mourn for the Beis Hamikdash, but life has to go on. It's impossible. We can't say we can't do anything just because there's no more Beis Hamikdash. It's davar she'ein lo sof. It's exera that the tzibur won't be able to uphold. They can't. We're not going to eat meat, not drink wine. We're not going to have fruit. We're not going to have bread. We're not going to have water. Nothing. It's impossible. And they backed off, and Rabbi Yeshua there in that Gemara suggests other things that we do to remember the Beis Hamikdash and so on. That's the Gemara that the Bir HaGra points to as a source of not eating meat and drinking wine during the 9 days. The Vilna Gaon doesn't spell this out there, but I think what he means, I'll be pashtus, what the Gra means is that, in a certain way, these people were right. They were right. The Beis Hamikdash is gone. We can't just go on with life as usual when there's no more Beis Hamikdash. We have to mourn it. We have to miss it all the time. We have to be cognizant of its absence all the time. We should even change our eating and drinking habits because there's no more Beis Hamikdash. But that's not practical. You can't do that. We can't live like that. However, and I think that's what the Gemara means. You know what? 9 days out of the year, a few days out of the year, Shavua Shechabo, then taka, we can get along without meat and wine. To say that we should never have meat and wine, like these pious Jews wanted to do after the Churban by Yeshua, Yeshua talked them out of it, they were right in a certain sense, but it wasn't practical. Life can't go on like that. You can't live forever and never have meat and wine ever again. However, a couple days out of the year, we're coming to Tisha B'Av to mourn the Beis Hamikdash and to observe the day that has to do with Churban Beis Hamikdash. You know what? For a few days before that, we can do without meat and wine. And the Vilna Gaon is suggesting that that's the mokor, that's the source, indicating that what these people wanted to accept upon themselves forever, as a practice forever, to avoid meat and wine, because they mourn the Beis Hamikdash and were cognizant of its absence. We can't do that on a full-time basis, but a couple days out of the year, 9 days out of the year, or for the Sfardim, many Sfardim, Shavua Shechal, a few days out of the year, you know what? We can pay special attention to the fact that the Beis Hamikdash is no longer here. And perhaps that's the mokor for avoiding Basar and Yayin during the 9 days. Gemara says later in Tainus on Daf Lamed Amud Aleph, the Gemara says that Kolamis Abel Yerushalayim, anybody who mourns Yerushalayim properly, is Zocha V'Roa B'Nechama, will merit to see the Nechama, the comfort of Yerushalayim. If you look carefully at the wording, it doesn't say Kolamis Abel Yerushalayim, whoever mourns Yerushalayim, Yizke V'Yira, will merit, will see the Nechama of Yerushalayim. It says in the present tense, Zocha V'Roa. You are meriting, you are seeing it right now. What do you mean? It's not here right now. So some suggest, no, what it means is that when we mourn the Beis Hamikdash, that itself is a nechama, because that itself shows that we're keeping it alive, that we still recognize its absence. We're really supposed to think, it says in the Shulchan Aruch, in the beginning of the Shulchan Aruch, we're supposed to think about the absence of the Beis Hamikdash all the time. It's difficult to do, but at least during this time of year, we should pay special attention to the fact that there's no more Beis Hamikdash, and that itself was a nechama, it's some form of comfort, because we recognize that life isn't the same without the Beis Hamikdash, and it's hard to do that on a day-to-day basis, even though we should try and do it also on a day-to-day basis, but at least during this time of year, we note the absence of the Beis Hamikdash, and one of the things we do by abstaining from meat and wine, it's not stam, except of course on Shabbos when there's no sense of mourning at all. But other than that, other than on Shabbos, for these few days we don't eat meat, we don't drink wine. We're recalling that the Beis Hamikdash, the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, indicates to us the idea that we can no longer just have life as always, and that itself is a partial nechama, and we should be zocha in the future. We have the partial nechama now by remembering the Beis Hamikdash. We zoch in the future. We're seeing the full nechama with binyan Beis Hamikdash. Amen.